Welcome to the podcast of All Means All. In this episode, Margaret Flood, María Carlos, and Anna Frizzarin will talk about universal design for learning.
I, as a pre-service teacher, I am very interested in universal design for learning. Why should I use it?
Good question. So, universal design for learning is a change in mindset where we start thinking about our students in terms of variability instead of disability and ability. UDL is where we are thinking about the strengths, the talents, and the unique perspectives of our learners rather than putting them into groups based on their needs. In the words of CAST, it is a glass half full way of thinking, where we look at all of the learning and all of the knowledge and all of the skills that a student already has, and we as educators support and challenge them to continue filling that glass.
Okay, so how can you describe that framework for me?
Okay, so the framework for universal design for learning is based on 3 principles: the principle of engagement, representation, and action and expression. Each of these principles have 3 guidelines each. And these guidelines are the key questions you would ask yourself around inclusion. Each of these guidelines have what they call checkpoints. And these checkpoints are suggested actions that the teacher can take to include every learner in their classroom.
You mentioned variability earlier. So can you explain about that a bit more, please?
Yes. So variability goes back to that not thinking about our students in silos. It is where we are going into our classroom and we know that we have a diverse range of learners within the classroom. But variability goes a step further. Variability is where we are looking at what is inside each individual learner as well. For example, a student may be really engaged in a subject that they really like at 9 a.m. in the morning, but at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, they're not so engaged in a subject they don't like. And it's really important for us as educators to realize all of the different things that impact variability, like the time of day, like if they're hungry, like if they have had a row with family member before they come to school. We often think in terms of the academic, but these are other areas that we need to think about as well. So it is about taking all of that into consideration and not labeling a student as average or above average or below average based on one assessment in one moment in time.
Yeah, and this concept is related to the aspect of neurodiversity. So UDL refers to studies in the field of the neurological sciences, and it says that each person has the same 3 neurological networks that concerns the way we learn. So these 3 different networks relate respectively to the how, to the why, and to the what we learn. And UDL assumes that these networks work differently for each student and for each person, and that is what the basis of this change in mindset you were talking about before, because if we are all different, then we can all do different things and we can choose how to express ourselves, and this is how UDL really implements an inclusive learning environment.
Fascinating. So I want to apply UDL in my class. You have been talking about different ways of accessing information, different ways of delivery, use of different materials. So as a teacher, how do I plan for that?
Okay, so following on from what Anna was saying about neurodiversity, UDL allows us to intentionally design because we know about those 3 networks and we know about variability. But UDL goes a step further because it is goal or learning outcomes orientated. And what that means is that us as educators needs to be very clear about the goal of a lesson or indeed a unit of lesson. And once we are clear about the expectations of our students for that goal, then we can look back at our plan and we can make sure that there are no barriers to the student achieving that goal. So a good example of this is the Rubik's Cube. So Pilar, you've been to college for 4 years, you've studied the Rubik's Cube, and you were going in now to teach it to your first class. And you have done an amazing plan. And you go in and you bring in your 30 Rubik's Cubes, one for every student. And you explain the goal. And the goal is to put the reds all together, the greens all together, the blues all together. But a student puts up their hand and says, Pilar, I'm blind. So you have to go back and you have to retrofit your plan because you have a blind student in your classroom. So you're very dedicated. You go home, you make a new plan. You design a new Rubik's Cube. You bring in a white Rubik's Cube with Braille. You have really thought about this student. The student puts up her hand, Pilar, I don't read Braille. And all of the students put up their hands and they say, Pilar, we don't know what the colours are anymore. So you have to go back and you have to retrofit again. So you come back into class, you've made a new Rubik's Cube. It has all of the colours, but every colour has a shape attached to it that the students can feel. So you explain this, you explain that red has a circle, that green has a triangle, and that every student in the class will be using the same Rubik's Cube, but they can feel or they can just look and they can achieve their goal that way. It also means that if students want to work with their peers, they can now do it in group work because they have the same content, but different ways of accessing it to achieve their goal.
Yeah, I think the main point is that you have to build up sort of a toolkit of materials and strategies and techniques you can offer to your students to offer them choices or how to access the content of the lesson or the topic or whatever the material used is. And it's really planning with intentionality again and setting up many opportunities to reach the same goal but in different ways according to what best fits to you as individual.
Very clear. So this has been talking about planning. What about teaching and learning?
Okay, so the teaching and learning follows on from that intentional planning, and you still have to have that intentionality in your practice. So Anna was mentioning this toolkit, and this toolkit of choices is where you have a range of choices, but you as the teacher, knowing the goal, intentionally choose the choices that will work best in the lesson. So a lovely example from a colleague of mine is she was doing a literacy class and she wanted every student to be able to enjoy reading and to be able to share what they learned from the reading. So she gave them 4 choices on how they obviously would read the book and then how they would share their reading. So they could write about it, they could do a poster, they could role play something from it, or they could do a little movie. And there was one student in the classroom and she was watching this student reading the book and then going from choice to choice to choice to choice. And she said she was really worried because this student wasn't settling on anything. But because it is about choice and flexibility, she took a step back. At the end, this student gave an excellent report. And on the reflection about his process, he said that the reason he enjoyed it so much was because he got to try every choice and find the one that suited his style best. And he was able to transfer that into other classes and other subjects, because now he'd had the opportunity to explore all of the choices and figure out what worked for him.
Yeah, I think that it's really important also this learning process where also the students themselves are involved and engaged, and that's how you build engagement and interest in the students also in their own learning, and yeah, how you make sure they are participating in the learning process.
Motivation is very important, yes.
And I think, just to give an analogy of it, if you think about our learning goal or our learning outcome. So everyone in this room today had to get to Brixton on Sunday by a certain time. So we used our Google Maps, we used our GPS, and we put in Brixton. We all started from different locations around the world. So this is like our students starting on different pathways to achieve the same goal. When we open Google Maps, it gives us a choice. Do we want to use a car, public transport, walk, cycle? We pick our choice, and then it gives us more options. So let's just say that we've picked we're driving. You go in and it will give you 2 or 3 routes. It will give you a route where there's tolls. It will give you a route where there's no tolls. It will highlight any barriers, any traffic jams on your chosen route. Once you choose your route, you then have the choice of listening to the directions while you're driving, of looking at the directions while you're driving, or doing both. As you're driving, if a barrier comes up, if a traffic jam comes up, it gives you the option to take an alternative route. We all still get to Brixton at the same time, but we have all taken different routes, and some of us have adapted our routes as we've gone.
Excellent. Now, a third point is that we work within institutions. So there has to be a formal assessment at the end of the course. How does UDL apply in this case?
So, yeah, also here the main principle is flexibility. So, and also in this case, building up choices for the students. Of course, we still have to deal with institutionalized assessment, but I can offer also in this case different options to my students and reach the assessment anyway. And this means also, for example, discussing with the students or let them come up with new ways of demonstrating what they've learned, their knowledge and their skills and the skills they acquired. And then of course you have to deal also with the organization of your school, the structure of your school, but it's all about agreeing on, I don't know, using a rubric, using other ways of assessment, but having a shared structure which also stays flexible and that allows for different options.
Absolutely. And an example that I could give of that was in my own teaching. I was teaching English and we were doing Romeo and Juliet. And the goal was for the students to be able to describe the characteristics of one of the characters. I had one student in this class who at the time I would have called challenging. It was constantly, I don't like, I hate, I don't want to do. So we were doing this character assignment and I decided that I would try some UDL approaches, and I found some checkpoints from the guidelines. And what I did was I offered choice in their assignment. So before, they only had the choice of writing. This time I said you can write, you can do a role play, or you can do a poster presentation. This student came up to me and offered me a fourth choice. He asked could he do a comic strip. So, like my colleague, I was a bit nervous, but I said yes. What I learned about this student in one comic strip was amazing. So I learned, firstly, he was an amazing artist. Secondly, I learned that the depth of knowledge he had about literature, about drama, and about the character of Romeo was something totally unexpected to me. Because up until this point, he could only express himself through the written word, but when I gave him another alternative, I could really see what he knew. And this student went from hating English to doing honours English for his Leaving Cert because we put in those options that allowed him to show himself and me and his other teachers what he really knew, not what writing on a piece of paper told us he knew.
Yeah, and this is also how you build the independence and the self-regulation skills of your students, because they really learn how to monitor their progress, and they really learn how to best express what they are learning. And that's also something very important.
Excellent examples, thank you. Finally, I see that in the website there are 2 tabs. One for in class and one for technology.
Okay, so I might start and let Anna come in. Again, in the spirit of universal design for learning, we are very conscious that what UDL will look like in a classroom in person will be different to what it looks like online. So we decided for the readers of this book that depending on the context they are in, that they can choose the tab and read the one that suits their context. If next year they're working in another context, they can go back and they can look at it through the other lens of their new context. In person is very much around group work, about having those face-to-face conversations, about being able to mix it up as you go along, but digital takes on a new meaning.
Yeah, and in person, I think that also the environment plays a role. So you should also plan how the space of your classroom or of your room looks like, and how the space and the environment can help the work, the individual or the group work. So this is something that is very specific to the in-person situation, which is of course very different from digital environments.
Yes, my experience in the digital environment is that you have to, that mindset that you were talking about in the beginning, you have to apply it as well, because you lose that spontaneity that students have with the teachers, with the relationship with the teachers in the class, the peer-to-peer interactions. Therefore, you need to choose your digital tools and apply them. You have to be aware that you can use asynchronous and synchronous, but you also have to be aware what UDL tells you to do, that is one step at a time. So choose a tool that you're familiar with, choose a tool that the students are familiar with, and then start implementing things.
And I think that also this different application of UDL in different contexts is also what all of this chapter is about. So we are providing some more general information and some reflections, but of course then we will also try to leave some resources and external links for the readers, so that they will have the opportunity to get deeper in what they really need for their practice.
And we've talked a lot about the general universal design for learning, and that could scare somebody listening to this or reading the chapter, because they will go, where do I start? Have I to do all of this on Monday? And the answer is no. What CAST recommend is one small change. And they give the analogy of Sunday night for a change for Monday morning. So it's Sunday night and you have your lesson plan and you realize that it's not very inclusive. What one small change can you make now to make the lesson more inclusive for your students on Monday? And after that, What other one small change can you make to build on your first small change? And that is how you enact UDL, one small change at a time. So it's not scary for you, but also that your students are learning this process as you go through it with them.
Excellent, and this is applicable to any subject, any matter, any context.
And any context, so whether it's in face or if it's in digital learning.
Thank you for listening to the podcast of All Means All. In the show notes, there is a link to the chapter in the open textbook. There you can find the transcript of the video and more information on the topic.